It was early morning when she arrived at the tall glass building that carried her company's name. The air was filled with the sound of people rushing in, employees balancing coffee cups in one hand and files in another, their shoes clicking fast against the marble floors. She walked quietly, dressed with grace, her eyes calm but sharp, and her posture steady. She looked like someone important, yet to those standing at the front desk, she seemed invisible. The receptionist glanced at her for barely a second, then without any smile, waved a hand toward the waiting area. "You can wait outside. This meeting is for executives only," the receptionist said flatly, without even asking her name. For a brief moment, she didn't respond. She just stood there, watching people pass by with hurried steps. Some of them looked at her, then turned away quickly. One man even smirked as if he knew she didn't belong in their world. No one asked who she was. No one cared. In their eyes, she was just another outsider standing in a place reserved for the powerful. She walked toward the glass doors as instructed, and the receptionist returned to typing on her computer, already forgetting her presence. Outside the boardroom, the woman leaned against the wall, her handbag resting lightly on her wrist. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She had lived her entire life facing moments where people judged her before knowing her story. But what stung wasn't the words. It was the arrogance. The assumption that she didn't belong, that she was less, that her voice would never matter inside those walls. She could hear the muffled laughter coming from the meeting room, the confident tones of people who thought they ran the world. And she thought to herself, how many employees have stood in this same place, told to wait outside, told that they were not worthy of a seat at the table? She glanced at her watch. Only a single minute had passed since she was told to wait. Just 60 seconds. But in that 1 minute, she saw more about the culture of her company than any report could tell her. The receptionist didn't know her. The executives behind the glass didn't know her, but soon they would. Soon they would see that the woman standing in silence outside the boardroom was not just another visitor. She was their new CEO. She was the one who had quietly purchased controlling shares of the company. The one who now held the authority to shape its future or destroy its rotten foundation. As she waited, memories came back to her. Memories of how far she had come. She remembered the long nights as a young girl, studying under a flickering lamp while the rest of the house slept. She remembered being told countless times that she wouldn't make it, that the world of business wasn't for women like her, that her dreams were too big and her voice too small. She remembered being rejected by companies that now begged for her partnership. Every scar of her journey had prepared her for this very moment, so being told to wait outside wasn't an insult. It was fuel. It was proof that the fight wasn't over, not just for her, but for every person who had ever been dismissed before being given a chance. She could hear footsteps approaching. A manager walked past her, glancing at her with curiosity, then whispering something under his breath as he opened the boardroom door. She caught only one word: stranger. He didn't greet her. He didn't even ask who she was. He just went in, leaving her outside like she was a shadow. And that was the moment she decided she would not wait any longer. She would not stand quietly while people like him carried themselves with pride built on exclusion. She straightened her posture and slowly walked back toward the door. The glass panels reflected her calm but determined face. Her hand hovered for a moment on the handle. She thought of the receptionist, the smirking employee, the dismissive manager. She thought of every single worker in this company who had been made to feel small. And then she pushed the door open. The sudden creak of the door silenced the room. All heads turned at once. Inside sat a long table with men and women in sharp suits, their laptops glowing, their files neatly stacked. They frowned at her, confused, irritated, as if she had interrupted something sacred. One man stood up immediately. "Ma'am, this is a private meeting," he said with authority. "You can't be here, please leave." She didn't leave. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped inside with quiet confidence, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The whispers began. "Who is she? What is she doing here? Doesn't she know this is an executive session? The man who had spoken earlier crossed his arms, clearly annoyed. But the woman didn't even glance at him. She walked straight to the table, placed her handbag gently on the surface, and looked around the room. Her eyes met theirs, one by one, slow and steady. The silence grew heavier, the kind that makes people shift uncomfortably in their seats. For a full 10 seconds she said nothing, and then, in a calm, steady voice, she spoke. "You told me to wait outside." Her words hung in the air, confusing everyone. Some exchanged glances, wondering what she meant. She let the weight of the silence grow again, before she continued. "But I don't wait outside of my own company." The effect was instant. Faces, drained of color. Chairs creaked as people sat up straighter. One executive dropped his pen. The man who had told her to leave stepped back, his confidence cracking. The room froze in disbelief. The stranger they had dismissed only a minute ago was not a stranger at all. She was their new CEO. And in that single moment, the power in the room shifted forever. The silence in the boardroom felt heavy, like the air itself had frozen. The woman stood tall at the head of the table, her presence filling the room without a single raised voice. Executives stared at her in disbelief, some leaning forward as though they had misheard her words, others frowning in quiet panic. The man who had tried to remove her only seconds earlier struggled to form a sentence. You're the CEO?" He stammered, his voice breaking the tense silence. She did not answer right away. Instead, she pulled out a chair at the end of the table and sat down with deliberate calm, as though she had every right to be there, which of course she did. Her eyes scanned the room again, steady and unblinking, making each executive feel as if she were staring directly into their soul. Then finally she spoke. "Yes, I am your CEO, and I bought this company because I believed it had potential. But in the first minute of stepping into this building, I saw more arrogance than potential." A ripple of unease passed across the room. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others tried to put on a mask of politeness, pretending as though they had not dismissed her only moments ago. But she remembered every face, every whisper, every arrogant glance. One executive, a tall man in a gray suit, leaned forward with a forced smile. "We had no idea, ma'am," he said carefully. "There must have been some confusion at the front desk. If we had known—" She cut him off with a calm hand gesture. "Exactly. If you had known. That is the problem." Her voice was firm but not loud, each word hitting harder than any shout could have. Respect should not be given only when you know someone's title. Respect should not depend on wealth or power or the clothes someone wears. Respect should be the standard, given to everyone who walks through these doors. Yet your staff failed that test the moment I arrived. The room grew still again. Nobody dared to look at the receptionist through the glass door outside. The truth was undeniable. They had built a culture where judgment came first, respect came last. She leaned back slightly, her hands folded on the table. "I have spent my entire life walking into rooms where I was underestimated. People looked at me and saw nothing, but I built my career by proving them wrong. Today I came here quietly, to see this company not from glossy reports but from the ground level, and in 60 seconds, I saw everything I needed to see." A woman sitting halfway down the table cleared her throat nervously. "With all due respect," she began, her voice trembling. "Perhaps this was just a misunderstanding. The CEO raised her eyebrows. "A misunderstanding? Then tell me, how many other people have been told to wait outside? How many employees, clients, or partners have been treated as if they do not belong? Do you think culture hides behind closed doors? No. Culture reveals itself in small moments. The tone at the front desk, the arrogance in a hallway, the way people treat those they believe are powerless." The words stung. Even those who had not spoken against her could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on them. Some lowered their eyes, others fidgeted with their pens, wishing the moment would pass. But she was not finished. She reached into her handbag and placed a slim folder on the table. The executives leaned forward, curious and uneasy. She slid it across the polished wood, and when the nearest man opened it, his face paled. Inside were printed reports, anonymous letters from employees, complaints of toxic leadership, whispers of favoritism, and stories of good workers being silenced or pushed aside. She had collected them all in the weeks leading up to this meeting. "I did not walk into this company blind," she said softly. "I knew the numbers. I knew the profits. But what I also knew was that behind these walls, people were suffering. They felt unheard, unseen, and disrespected. And today, before I even stepped into this room, your actions confirmed every one of those reports." One man slammed his fist lightly against the table, his voice tight with frustration. "With all due respect, you can't make judgments based on a single incident. We've run this company successfully for years." Her eyes narrowed, and the man stopped mid-sentence. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence alone carried more authority than his entire protest. After a moment, she replied, "Success is not measured only in profits. It is measured in how you treat people. If money is the only success, you see, then you have already failed." The words hung like thunder in the room. For a moment, no one dared to speak. Then she stood, her chair sliding back with a soft scrape against the floor. She walked slowly around the table, her eyes still fixed on the faces of those who had dismissed her. Every step was deliberate, a reminder that the power in the room had shifted completely. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "This company will not continue as it has. I will not allow arrogance to run my leadership team. I will not allow disrespect to poison the culture. Things are about to change." The executives looked at each other, some with fear, others with the desperate hope that they might survive this storm. But none of them doubted anymore. The woman who had been told to wait outside was no outsider. She was the leader who would decide their future. And in that moment, they all realized the reckoning had only just begun. The room stayed frozen as she moved back to her chair. Every executive kept their eyes low, like school children caught doing something shameful. She sat down again slowly, folding her hands together, her expression calm but sharp enough to cut through steel. Her silence was heavier than any speech. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Then she spoke again, her voice steady. "I want each of you to answer me this. How do you measure respect in this company?" No one replied. Papers rustled faintly. A nervous cough broke the quiet, but not a single answer came. She let the silence grow longer, pressing against them until one man finally tried to speak. He was older, with silver hair and an expensive watch, the kind of man who had spent years walking into boardrooms, certain that he belonged. "Respect," he began, forcing confidence into his voice, "is earned by performance, by the results. People deliver. That has always been the way we run things here." She studied him, her face unreadable. Then she leaned forward slightly and asked, "And who decides what performance is worth respecting? You?" The man swallowed hard. He didn't reply. She turned to the rest of the table. "Respect is not something you hand out like a reward. Respect is the foundation of every healthy company. Without it, performance doesn't matter. Profits don't matter. Because when you strip people of their dignity, you strip the company of its soul." Her words struck harder than a hammer. Some executives shifted in their chairs, trying to look busy with their notes, hoping her eyes wouldn't find them next. But she remembered everything. She remembered who smirked when she stood outside. She remembered the manager who whispered "stranger" under his breath. She remembered the cold receptionist. She opened another folder from her bag and slid it across the table. This time the papers showed employee surveys and exit interviews. Words like toxic, ignored, and unfair leapt off the page in bold print. "This," she said firmly, "is your legacy. Not the money you brag about, not the deals you closed. This culture of arrogance is what you built." A woman in a navy suit finally spoke up, her voice sharp. "With all due respect, employees always complain. It doesn't mean leadership has failed. You can't run a company by listening to every little problem." The CEO looked at her for a long moment. Then, without raising her voice, she said, One little problem? Tell me, when an employee is dismissed, when they are silenced, when they are told they don't matter, do you think it feels little to them? When I walked into this building, I was told to wait outside. Did that feel little to me? The woman dropped her gaze immediately. The CEO stood again and began walking slowly around the table. Her heels tapped softly against the polished floor, but every step made the room feel smaller. She stopped behind the man who had called her a stranger. He stiffened, his hands gripping the table edge. "You," she said quietly. "You whispered under your breath when you saw me outside. You didn't know who I was, so you mocked me. How many others have you mocked in these hallways? How many good people have left because of voices like yours?" The man opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came. His throat worked silently, his face pale. She did not need to hear an answer. Her silence judged him harder than any speech. Then she moved on, stopping behind another executive. "And you?" she said softly. "You told me to leave this room. You stood tall, certain of your authority, certain I did not belong. Tell me, how many times have you pushed others out of spaces they deserve to be in?" The man stared straight ahead, sweating under the weight of her words. One by one, she moved around the table, addressing each executive, not always with names, but with sharp truths. Each person was reminded of their arrogance, their failures, their coldness toward those beneath them. The room had turned into a courtroom, and she was both judge and witness. No one was spared. Finally, she returned to her seat at the head of the table. She sat down with the same calmness she had entered with. "This is not leadership," she said, her voice low but powerful. "This is not excellence. This is poison. And I will not allow it to continue." The executives knew what was coming. Some tried to speak, others shifted nervously. But she raised her hand and they fell silent again. She picked up the folder of complaints, tapped it gently against the table, and then set it down. "I have read the voices of the people you were meant to lead. I have seen your actions with my own eyes. And I have decided, today is the last day you will sit at this table." The words hit like a thunderclap. Some gasped, others froze in disbelief. The boardroom that once radiated power now trembled with fear. One man tried to argue, his voice desperate. "You can't just fire us, all. We've built this company, we've made it successful." She looked at him calmly. "No, the workers built this company. The people you ignored, the people you disrespected, the people you silenced. They carried this place on their backs while you sat here believing you were kings. Your success was borrowed, and today, the debt is due." The room fell silent again. Every executive knew the truth. They had no defense left. The woman they dismissed, the woman they underestimated, now held every ounce of power, and she was about to use it. In that moment, she looked out the glass wall toward the open office space where ordinary employees worked. She could see their heads bowed over computers, their hands busy with tasks, unaware of what was unfolding inside. She thought of them, of the janitors, the assistants, the quiet workers who had been overlooked. This wasn't just about firing arrogant managers. This was about giving power back to those who deserved it. She leaned forward once more, her voice soft but steady. "This company has forgotten what respect looks like. I will rebuild it, but not with you. Consider this your last meeting." And, with those words, the reckoning truly began. The room broke into quiet chaos. No one shouted, but the sound of heavy breathing, chairs scraping, and nervous whispers filled the air. The executives who had always felt untouchable now looked like trapped animals, glancing at each other, trying to find a way out. But there was no escape. The new CEO sat firmly in her chair, her calm face a mirror that reflected back all their arrogance. She picked up the folder of complaints again and opened it slowly. Her fingers brushed each page as though she was counting every voice that had been ignored. "Do you know what it feels like?" she began softly. "To work every day, to give everything you have, and still be treated like nothing. Your employees know. They told me. And today, they will know that their voices matter." Her words echoed like a verdict. Then she called the first name. The man in the gray suit who had told her to leave earlier froze in place. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the table. "Stand up," she said calmly. He hesitated, but her eyes left no room for argument. Slowly, he pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. "You built your power on fear," she said evenly. "But fear is not leadership. It is weakness. You are dismissed, effective immediately." The man's face turned pale. "You can't just—" he started, but the CEO raised her hand and cut him off. "Security will escort you out." Two security officers appeared at the door, almost as if they had been waiting. The man tried to protest again, but the weight of the silence from the rest of the room crushed his words. He gathered his papers in shaky hands, his eyes darting around, looking for someone to defend him. No one moved. No one spoke. He walked out, his footsteps heavy and slow, and when the door closed behind him, the room felt smaller. She turned her eyes to the next executive, the one who had whispered stranger under his breath. "Stand," she said again. He rose, his face already red with shame. He opened his mouth, perhaps to deny, perhaps to apologize. But she didn't give him the chance. "You forgot the first rule of leadership," she said quietly. "Every person has value. You treated people like shadows. Today, you are the shadow. You are dismissed." One by one, she called them out. Each firing was calm, without anger, but each word struck with finality. Some begged, some argued, some even tried to accuse others, but none of it mattered. She had already seen enough. For years, these men and women had sat in this room, making decisions that crushed the spirit of those who worked beneath them. Now, in a single morning, their reign of arrogance was ending. As the firings continued, word began to spread outside the boardroom. Employees noticed executives being escorted out, their faces pale, their steps unsteady. People stopped working, whispering to one another. Soon, a small crowd gathered quietly near the glass wall of the boardroom, peeking inside, unable to believe what they were witnessing. For so long, those managers had seemed untouchable. Now, they were leaving one by one. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. With each dismissal, the fear in the room deepened. But outside, something else was growing: hope. The employees who had once felt invisible were now seeing justice unfold before their eyes. Their voices, once ignored, had been heard. At last, only a few executives remained. Some sat frozen, too afraid to move, while others stared at the table, unable to lift their eyes. The CEO looked at them quietly, letting the silence sit heavy for a long moment. Then she said, "Those of you still sitting here, I have one question. Why should I let you stay?" Her words sliced through the air. One woman finally found her voice. I want to change," she stammered. "I know I've been part of this culture, but I can do better. Give me a chance to prove myself." The CEO studied her for a long moment. "Change begins with humility," she said finally. "Perhaps you can learn, but know this: you will be watched closely. Leadership is not a privilege, it is a duty. If you fail again, it will not be forgiven." The woman nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. The others remained silent, too shaken to speak. When the firings were over, the CEO stood once more. She walked to the glass wall that separated the boardroom from the open office space. Dozens of employees were standing there now, watching with wide eyes. She opened the door and stepped out to face them. The whispers stopped immediately, and the room fell into silence. She looked at the workers, the assistants, the analysts, the janitors, the people who had carried the company on their backs without recognition. She saw surprise in their faces, but also something else: a spark of hope. She smiled faintly. "Not with arrogance, but with warmth. I was told to wait outside today," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But I will never tell any of you that you don't belong. This is your company as much as mine. From today forward, things will be different." The crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't the forced applause of obligation. It was real, raw, and filled with emotion. Some people even had tears in their eyes. For the first time in years, they felt seen. They felt respected. Back inside the boardroom, the executives who had survived sat quietly, their faces pale, their pride shattered. They knew they had just witnessed the end of an era. The CEO closed the door again and looked at them one last time. "Remember this day," she said firmly, "because this is the day arrogance died in this company. From here on, respect will be our foundation. Without it, we are nothing. With it, we can build something greater than we have ever imagined." And with that, she ended the meeting. The reign of arrogance was over, and the new chapter was about to begin. The boardroom was silent now, the air still heavy with the memory of what had just happened. The executives who remained sat small in their chairs, no longer puffed up with pride or arrogance. They had witnessed the fall of their colleagues, the tearing down of a toxic culture, and they knew things would never be the same. The woman who had been told to wait outside only 1 hour earlier now sat firmly in command of the entire company. But she wasn't thinking about them anymore. She was thinking about the people outside. She was thinking about the hundreds of employees who had carried this company on their shoulders, while the managers at this table drained the spirit out of them. She knew the real work was not firing the arrogant, it was building up the forgotten. She stood again, not with anger but with purpose, and walked back to the glass doors. She pushed them open and stepped into the wide-open office where employees had gathered in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Their faces were filled with curiosity, fear, and hope all at once. Some held their breath, some whispered to each other, and some simply stared, unable to believe that change could really come. She raised her hand gently, and the room grew quiet. "I know you are wondering what just happened in there," she said, her voice carrying across the floor. "You saw people leave and you heard the silence that followed. But let me tell you this. What you witnessed today was not destruction, it was rebirth." The employees leaned in, listening. Her words were steady, simple, but they hit deep. "For too long," she continued, "this company has been ruled by arrogance. Too many of you have been treated as less, ignored, silenced, and made to feel like your work did not matter. I know this because I have read your words, I have seen your pain, and today I want you to know I hear you." A wave of emotion moved through the crowd. Some people lowered their eyes, some nodded quickly, and others looked at her with a kind of disbelief, as if waiting to see if she truly meant it. She smiled softly. "When I walked through these doors this morning, I was told to wait outside. But I will never tell you that. No one who gives their time, their energy, and their heart to this company will ever be told they don't belong. Because this company does not run on titles. It runs on people. On you." The applause started slowly. 1 or 2 claps from the back of the room. But then it grew, spreading like a spark turning into fire. Soon the whole floor was filled with applause. It wasn't polite applause, the kind given to a speech you are forced to hear. It was real. It was raw. It came from hearts that had been waiting years for someone to say those words. When the sound softened, she spoke again. "But words alone are not enough. Change will come with actions. From today forward, this company will have new leadership. Leaders who listen, leaders who respect, leaders who understand that every single person matters. That begins now." She announced that a new committee of employees from every level of the company would be formed. So decisions would not be made by executives alone, but with the voices of workers included. She promised fair treatment, equal opportunity, and transparency where there had only been secrecy before. She explained that promotions would be based not on favoritism or arrogance, but on merit, teamwork, and respect. The workers listened, wide-eyed. For years they had worked in silence, believing nothing could change. Now, in a single morning, they were hearing promises they had once thought impossible. Some people began to cry quietly, not out of sadness but out of relief. Others hugged each other, their faces bright with hope. Back in the boardroom, the surviving executives sat frozen, hearing every word through the open doors. They knew they had been spared only by chance, and they knew the world they had built was gone forever. The new CEO's voice carried into their ears like a warning. It was respect or nothing. The woman looked out at the crowd once more. She remembered her own journey. The nights she had been told she didn't belong, the times she had been laughed at, the doors that had been closed to her face. And now she stood here, the head of a company, not to prove her doubters wrong, but to show the forgotten that they were always right to believe in themselves. "I want you to remember this day," she said finally, her voice strong and clear, "because this is not just my victory, it is yours. This company belongs to the people who believe in it, who give their best to it, who never stop trying even when no one notices. From now on, you will be noticed. From now on, you will be respected." The duo crowd erupted again, louder than before. The building itself seemed to shake with the sound. For the first time in years, the workers weren't clapping because they had to. They were clapping because they wanted to. As the noise filled the air, the CEO stepped back slightly, letting the people take in the moment. She didn't need to say more. She had shown them already, not with promises alone, but with actions. She had walked into the building as a stranger, been told to wait outside, and in 1 minute had seen the truth. But in the hours that followed, she had not just claimed her power. She had given power back to the people who deserved it most. That was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter built not on arrogance but on respect, not on fear but on dignity. And as she looked around the office at the faces of the people cheering, she knew something with absolute certainty. This company would never be the same again.